The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the dusty air of Concordia, Kansas, but Zarah Vance barely flinched as she trudged along the sun-baked road leading into town. The year was 1875, and she had heard enough gunfire in her 22 years to know when to worry and when to keep walking. This shot was distant, probably just some cowpoke showing off or hunting small game. Zarah adjusted the heavy burlap sack slung over her shoulder, her entire life's possessions swaying with each exhausted step. 3 days of walking had left her boots worn thin and her spirit even thinner, but Concordia represented her last hope. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Zarah's honey-brown hair clung to her sweat-dampened face. Her once fine blue dress had faded to a pale shadow of itself, patched in multiple places, but still carrying the dignity of careful stitching. She could feel curious eyes watching from the porches and windows of the scattered homesteads as she approached the town proper. A woman alone, especially one carrying everything she owned, was cause for suspicion in these parts. Zarah's throat burned with thirst as she spotted the town's water trough. The buildings of Concordia rose before her, a main street lined with false-fronted establishments, the steeple of a small church, and the steady movement of people going about their business. She had heard Concordia was growing, that the railroad had brought prosperity and opportunity. Now, seeing it for herself, she prayed those rumors weren't just trail talk. As she reached the edge of town, the weight of her sack grew unbearable. Zarah's knees buckled slightly, forcing her to pause and readjust her burden. Inside that rough burlap were the remnants of her former life. Her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, a small box of letters, 2 dresses, a worn Bible, and a pouch containing $17.35, all that remained after the farm was sold to cover her father's debts. "Miss, you look like you could use a hand." The voice startled her. Zarah turned to find a tall man atop a chestnut mare, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and Zarah took an instinctive step back, clutching her sack tighter. "I don't need charity," she said, squaring her shoulders despite her exhaustion. The man stepped forward into the light, revealing features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that seemed naturally inclined to smile. He wasn't dressed like the typical cowboys she'd encountered. His clothes were clean and well kept, his manner less rough. "Not offering charity, madam." "Just common decency." His eyes fell to her sack. "Looks heavy," Zarah hesitated. "It contains everything I have left in this world." The man studied her for a moment, then extended both hands. "Then perhaps you'd allow me to help you carry it, at least until you reach wherever you're headed." There was something in his open stance and direct gaze that made Zarah pause. After days of wary glances and suspicious townsfolk along her journey, the simple offer of assistance without judgment felt almost foreign. "I'm Keegan Ashwood," he said, breaking the silence. "I've got a small ranch outside of town." "Zarah Vance," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for work in Concordia." Keegan nodded, his hands still extended. "Well, Miss Vance, Concordia's a decent town with decent folk, but the sun's getting low and you look ready to drop." "My offer stands." Zarah's pride battled with her practical nature. Her arms ached, her feet were blistered, and the prospect of finding lodging before nightfall was daunting. Reluctantly, she loosened her grip on the sack. "Just to the nearest boarding house," she conceded. Keegan's smile was warm as he carefully took the sack from her, handling it with unexpected reverence. "Mrs. Holloway runs a clean place 3 buildings down from the general store. Reasonable rates, too." As they walked side by side into town, Keegan leading his horse by the reins with one hand and carrying her sack with the other, Zarah felt the stares of townspeople. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight. She had not come all this way to be defeated by gossip or judgment. "You traveled far." Keegan asked, his tone conversational. "From Missouri," Zarah replied, seeing no harm in the truth. "Our farm failed after my father passed." Keegan nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's been a hard few years for farmers. Drought's been unforgiving." It wasn't just the drought, Zarah said, surprised at her own candor. Father borrowed heavily after Mother died. The bank took everything else. They reached the boarding house, a two-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a small, well-tended garden out front. A wooden sign reading Holloway Boarding House swayed gently in the evening breeze. "Wait here," Keegan said, handing Zarah back her sack before tying his horse to the hitching post. Before she could protest, he was striding up the steps and through the door. Zarah stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, conscious of her dusty appearance and the curious glances from passers-by. A minute later, Keegan emerged with a plump, gray-haired woman in a spotless apron. "This is Mrs. Holloway," Keegan introduced. "She has a room available." The older woman appraised Zarah with kind but shrewd eyes. "Mr. Ashwood says you're looking for honest work. I can offer you a room at $2 a week, which includes breakfast. Supper's extra, but you're welcome to use the kitchen if you provide your own fixings." Zarah calculated quickly. At that rate, her money wouldn't last long. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll need to secure employment first. Perhaps there's somewhere less." "Miss Vance is being modest," Keegan interrupted smoothly. "She's already arranged to help at my ranch starting tomorrow. The room is just until more permanent arrangements can be made." Zarah's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with confusion and a flash of anger. Keegan met her gaze steadily, a silent plea in his eyes. Mrs. Holloway smiled. "Well, that's different then. Any friend of Keegan Ashwood is welcome here." "Come in, dear. You look dead on your feet." As Mrs. Holloway turned back toward the house, Zarah grabbed Keegan's arm. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I haven't agreed to anything, I know," he replied quietly, "but you need a place to stay tonight, and Mrs. Holloway doesn't rent to women without respectable employment or a husband. I'm offering you legitimate work, Miss Vance. My housekeeper left last month to get married, and I haven't found a replacement. The position includes room and board at the ranch and fair wages." Zarah studied his face for any sign of deception. "Why would you offer employment to a stranger?" Keegan's expression softened. "Because 7 years ago I arrived in Concordia with everything I owned in a similar sack, and someone took a chance on me." He gestured toward the boarding house door. "You can refuse the job tomorrow if you wish, but at least you'll have a bed tonight and a chance to clean up." Exhaustion and practicality won out over suspicion. "Very well, Mr. Ashwood, but I want to be clear about the terms of employment before I agree to anything permanent." "Absolutely," he nodded. "I'll come by tomorrow morning and we can discuss it properly. For now, get some rest." As Keegan turned to leave, Zarah called after him. "Mr. Ashwood," he paused, looking back. "Thank you for helping with my sack." His smile returned, genuine and warm. "My pleasure, Miss Vance." Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway showed Zarah to a small but clean room on the second floor. The bed was narrow but looked softer than anything Zarah had slept on in weeks. "Bathrooms down the hall. There's hot water for washing up," Mrs. Holloway explained. "Keegan's a good man. He's built that ranch from nothing and he treats his workers fair." Zarah placed her sack carefully on the bed. "You seem to think highly of him." "This town does. He's on the town council now, helps organize the Harvest Festival every year." Mrs. Holloway headed for the door. "Supper's in an hour if you're interested. Nothing fancy, just stew and biscuits." Alone at last, Zarah sank onto the bed beside her sack, her fingers running over the rough burlap. The encounter with Keegan Ashwood left her confused and wary, yet undeniably grateful. In her experience, men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Yet his help had seemed genuine, his offer of employment possibly legitimate. Zarah opened her sack and carefully removed her mother's silver hairbrush. The tarnished handle still fit perfectly in her palm, a tangible connection to happier times. As she brushed her tangled hair, Zarah contemplated her options. Accepting Keegan's offer meant leaving town to work on an isolated ranch for a man she'd just met. Refusing meant starting from nothing in a town where she had no connections and dwindling resources. Neither choice was without risk, but as Zarah stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, she made her decision. She would meet with Keegan Ashwood tomorrow, evaluate his offer properly, and decide with a clear head. For tonight, She would allow herself the luxury of a real bed and a hot meal, small comforts that felt monumental after her long journey. Dawn broke over Concordia with a brilliant display of pink and gold that filtered through the thin curtains of Zarah's room. She had slept deeply, exhaustion overriding her usual vigilance, and woke feeling more refreshed than she had in weeks. After washing and changing into her second dress, a simple brown cotton that was less travel-worn than yesterday's blue, Zarah repacked her sack and headed downstairs. The dining room was occupied by 3 other boarders, all men who tipped their hats politely as she entered. Mrs. Holloway bustled over with a plate of eggs and bacon, along with a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Ashwood will be here within the hour, she informed Zarah. Eat up, you'll need your strength if you're going to be working at the ranch. Zarah hadn't fully committed to accepting Keegan's offer, but she didn't correct the assumption. The food was simple but well prepared, and she ate with the careful restraint of someone accustomed to making meals stretch, true to Mrs. Holloway's prediction. Keegan arrived as Zarah was finishing her coffee. He looked even more respectable in the morning light, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hat in his hands as he entered the dining room. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he greeted. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Zarah replied, aware of the interested glances from the other boarders. "If you're ready, I thought we might walk over to the general store. I need to pick up some supplies and we can discuss the position on the way." Zarah nodded, gathering her sack. Keegan immediately reached for it, but she held firm. "I can manage, Mr. Ashwood." Outside, the morning air was still cool, the streets beginning to fill with the day's activity. Wagons rolled past, shopkeepers swept their storefronts, and children ran toward the small schoolhouse at the end of the street. "My ranch is about 3 miles outside of town," Keegan explained as they walked. "Nothing grand, 200 acres, mostly cattle with some crops." The house is modest but sturdy, with a separate room for the housekeeper attached to the kitchen. "What exactly would my duties entail?" Zarah asked, cooking, cleaning, mending the usual household tasks. "I have 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, but they take their meals in the main house." Keegan glanced at her. "The pay is $15 a month plus room and board." Zarah tried not to show her surprise. It was a fair wage, more than fair, compared to what she had expected to find. "And I would have my own quarters, separate and private, completely." With a lock on the door, Keegan added, seeming to understand her unspoken concern, they reached the general store, a large establishment with wide windows displaying everything from tools to fabric. Inside, the shelves were well stocked, a testament to Concordia's connection to the railroad. "Morning, Keegan," called the storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Who's your friend?" "Morning, Howard. This is Miss Vance. She'll be taking over as housekeeper at the ranch." Keegan turned to Zarah. "Howard Fletcher runs the best store in 3 counties. Howard beamed. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Vance. Any friend of Keegan's is welcome here." While Keegan discussed his supply order with Howard, Zarah wandered the store, examining the goods. It had been months since she'd been in such a well-stocked establishment. She lingered by a display of fabrics, her fingers running over a bolt of soft blue calico. "That would suit you," Keegan said, appearing beside her. "The blue matches your eyes." Zarah pulled her hand away, embarrassed at being caught daydreaming. "I'm not in a position to purchase fabric, Mr. Ashwood. Consider it an advance on your wages," he suggested. "You'll need work dresses at the ranch, and I doubt you have many in that sack." The offer was tempting, but pride made her hesitate. "I don't like to begin employment in debt." Keegan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I respect that, but the offer stands if you change your mind." He gestured toward the door. "Shall we continue our discussion outside?" Once back on the street, Zarah asked the question that had been nagging at her since yesterday. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Ashwood, offering employment to a woman you just met?" Keegan stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Truthfully." "Because when I saw you yesterday, carrying everything you owned and still walking with your head high, I recognized something in you. Determination, pride, the same qualities I had when I came here with nothing." He paused, his expression earnest. And because my mother always said that the measure of a person is how they treat those who can offer them nothing in return. His answer was so straightforward, so lacking in artifice, that Zarah found herself believing him despite her natural caution. Very well, Mr. Ashwood. I accept your offer on a trial basis, 1 month after which either of us can end the arrangement. Keegan's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him appear younger and even more handsome. That's fair. We can leave for the ranch whenever you're ready. I'm ready now, Zarah replied, adjusting her grip on her sack. I've imposed on Mrs. Holloway's hospitality long enough. Then I'll settle up with her and fetch the wagon, Keegan said. I left it at the livery when I came into town this morning. As he turned to go, Zarah called after him, echoing his words from the day before. Mr. Ashwood, I can manage my sack myself, but I appreciate the offer of both hands to hold it. His expression softened, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Then he tipped his hat and strode away, leaving Zarah to wonder if she had made the right decision. The journey to Keegan's ranch took just under an hour, the wagon following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers. As they traveled, Keegan pointed out landmarks and neighboring properties, his pride in the land evident in every description. Most of these folks have been here since before the war, he explained. Good neighbors, by and large, we help each other during roundup and harvest. Zarah listened, taking in the vastness of the prairie. It was different from the wooded hills of Missouri, more open and somehow more honest in its beauty. How long have you had your ranch? 7 years, Keegan replied. Bought the first 50 acres with money I saved working cattle drives, added more as I could afford it. The railroad coming through 3 years ago helped. Suddenly we could get our cattle to market faster for better prices. You've accomplished a lot in a short time, Zarah observed. Keegan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. I've been fortunate, but it hasn't been without struggle. He gestured ahead. There it is, Ashwood Ranch. The homestead came into view as they crested a gentle rise. A 2-story farmhouse painted white with green trim stood proudly, flanked by a large barn, a smaller bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, and a corral held several horses that raised their heads as the wagon approached. Fields of wheat stretched to the west, while cattle grazed on pasture to the north. It's lovely, Zarah said sincerely, impressed by the neat, well-maintained property. Keegan's face glowed with quiet pride. It's home. As they pulled up to the house, 2 men emerged from the barn. One was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face and silver-streaked hair. The other was younger, closer to Keegan's age, with a friendly grin and a shock of red hair. Miss Vance, meet Jacob Miller and Finn O'Brien, my ranch hands, Keegan introduced as he helped Zarah down from the wagon. Gentlemen, this is Miss Zarah Vance, our new housekeeper. Both men touched their hats respectfully. Madam, they said in unison. Jacob's been with me since the beginning, Keegan explained. Finn joined us last year. They live in the bunkhouse but take meals in the main house. Pleased to meet you both, Zarah said, clutching her sack a little tighter under their curious gazes. Let me show you to your quarters, Keegan offered, leading her toward the house. Inside, the farmhouse was surprisingly comfortable. The main floor contained a spacious kitchen, a dining area with a large oak table, a parlor with well-worn but quality furniture, and Keegan's study. Upstairs were several bedrooms, which Keegan explained were currently unused except for his own. Attached to the kitchen, accessible through both an interior door and a separate outside entrance, was a snug room with a narrow bed, a small dresser, a rocking chair, and a window overlooking a kitchen garden. As Keegan had promised, the door had a sturdy lock. It's not fancy, Keegan said, but it's private and comfortable. It's perfect, Zarah replied honestly. After weeks of uncertainty, having a space that was hers alone felt like an incredible luxury. I'll let you get settled, Keegan said. Take your time. Kitchen's stocked, but if you're not up to cooking tonight, we can manage. After Keegan left, closing the door behind him, Zarah set her sack on the bed and finally allowed herself to relax. The room was clean and warm, with simple curtains at the window and a colorful quilt on the bed. Someone, Keegan, presumably had placed a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Zarah unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully. Her mother's hairbrush went on the dresser, her father's pocket watch beside the bed. The box of letters she tucked into the dresser drawer, along with her meager savings. Her Bible took a place of honor on the small table beside the rocking chair. The 2 dresses she hung on pegs along the wall. When everything was arranged to her satisfaction, Zarah sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. 24 hours ago, she had been trudging toward Concordia with no prospects and dwindling hope. Now she had employment, shelter, and the beginning of security. It seemed almost too fortunate to trust. Yet as she looked around her new room, listening to the distant sounds of men working and the gentle prairie wind, Zarah allowed herself a small measure of hope. Perhaps Concordia would indeed be the fresh start she so desperately needed. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Miss Vance, it's nearly supper time," Keegan called. "No pressure to cook today, but you're welcome to join us." Zarah squared her shoulders and opened the door. "I'll prepare supper, Mr. Ashwood. It's why you hired me after all." Keegan's smile was warm. "Only if you're certain. We've gotten by with our own cooking for weeks now." "I insist," Zarah said firmly. "Consider it my way of beginning as I mean to go on." In the kitchen, Zarah found ample supplies: flour, salt pork, beans, potatoes, and a variety of preserved goods. She set to work immediately, grateful for the familiar routine of cooking after days of uncertainty. By the time Jacob and Finn came in from the evening chores, she had prepared a hearty meal of salt pork, beans, cornbread, and fried potatoes. The men washed up at the pump outside before entering the kitchen, their appreciative glances at the laden table making Zarah feel a small surge of pride. They ate with the healthy appetite of men who worked hard, complimenting her cooking between bites. "This is proper food," Jacob declared, reaching for a second helping of cornbread. "No offense to your cooking, Keegan, but Miss Vance here has a special touch." "None taken," Keegan laughed. "I've never claimed to be anything but adequate in the kitchen." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, with the men discussing the day's work and plans for the coming week. Zarah mostly listened, learning about the ranch's operations and the rhythm of life there. Occasionally, Keegan would deliberately include her in the conversation, asking her opinion or explaining some aspect of ranching she might not understand. After supper, when Jacob and Finn had returned to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was clean, Keegan lingered, helping Zarah put away the last of the dishes despite her protests. "You don't need to do that, Mr. Ashwood. It's my job." "I know," he said, carefully stacking plates on a shelf. "But my mother also taught me that just because someone is paid to do work doesn't mean they should be left to do it alone when an extra pair of hands is available." Zarah studied him curiously. "You mention your mother often. Is she?" "She passed 6 years ago," Keegan replied, a shadow crossing his features. "Influenza. My father went the year before his heart. They had a small ranch in Colorado. I came here after selling it, wanting a fresh start." "I'm sorry," Zarah said softly. "I lost my mother 4 years ago. Father this past winter." They shared a moment of silent understanding, 2 people who knew the particular ache of being the last of their family. "Well," Keegan said finally, hanging the dish towel to dry, "thank you for the excellent supper, Miss Vance. You've made a fine first impression on all of us. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Ashwood." As Keegan bid her good night and left through the kitchen door, Zarah found herself watching him go, wondering again about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. To this man who offered help with both hands and seemed to ask nothing in return except honest work. In her small room, as she prepared for bed, Zarah finally allowed the tension she'd been carrying to release. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of something she had almost forgotten: security. It was tentative and perhaps temporary, but for tonight it was enough. The next few weeks established a rhythm to life at Ashwood Ranch that Zarah found unexpectedly comforting. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for the men, then spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and tending to the kitchen garden. The work was hard but satisfying, and Zarah took pride in creating a well-ordered, comfortable household. Keegan proved to be a fair and considerate employer. He never questioned her methods or complained about her work, instead expressing genuine appreciation for the improvements she made to the house. When she mentioned needing supplies from town, he either provided them promptly or arranged transportation, so she could select them herself. The ranch hands, Jacob and Finn, treated her with respect tinged with the awkwardness of bachelors unused to female company. They were careful to clean their boots before entering the house, removed their hats at the table, and thanked her sincerely for every meal. In return, Zarah made sure their clothes were properly mended and occasionally surprised them with special treats, apple pie or molasses cookies, after particularly long days of work. As April turned to May, the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, and the workload on the ranch intensified with spring calving. Zarah often found herself preparing extra meals to be taken out to the men working in the distant pastures. On one such day, she decided to deliver the food herself, needing a break from the confines of the house. She found Keegan, Jacob, and Finn in the north pasture, where a cow was struggling with a difficult birth. The men were so focused on helping the animal that they didn't notice Zarah's approach until she was nearly upon them. "Lunch," she announced, holding up the basket she had packed. Keegan looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Vance, you didn't need to bring it yourself." "I wanted some fresh air," she explained, setting the basket down on a flat rock nearby. Then, noticing their predicament, she asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" The men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about involving her in such a task. But the cow let out a distressed moan, and Zarah stepped forward without waiting for permission. "I grew up on a farm, Mr. Ashwood. This isn't my first calving." After a moment's hesitation, Keegan nodded. "We could use another pair of hands. The calf is turned wrong." For the next half hour, Zarah worked alongside the men, her sleeves rolled up and her dress protected by one of Keegan's spare shirts. Her knowledge proved valuable, her smaller hands able to reach where the men's could not. When the calf finally emerged, alive and breathing, a collective sigh of relief rose from the group. "Well done, Miss Vance," Jacob said with newfound respect. "Not many town ladies would dive in like that." "I'm not a town lady," Zarah replied, washing her hands in the water bucket Finn had brought. "And a life is a life, whether human or animal." As they finally sat to eat the lunch she had brought, cold fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts, Zarah was conscious of Keegan's gaze on her. When she met his eyes, he smiled, an expression of genuine admiration. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Vance," he said quietly, as Jacob and Finn discussed the new calf a few feet away. "Is that a good thing, Mr. Ashwood?" she asked. "A very good thing," he assured her. "Most people are exactly what they first appear to be. It's rare to discover layers." The way he looked at her then made Zarah's heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the exertion of helping with the calving. She looked away, focusing on her food, but the warm feeling lingered. That evening, as Zarah prepared supper, she found herself humming softly, a habit she had abandoned after her father's death. The simple tune filled the kitchen as she moved about, unaware that Keegan had entered until he spoke. "That's lovely," he said, causing her to start slightly. "I haven't heard music in this house in a long time." Zarah felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't realize I was doing it." "Please don't stop on my account," Keegan said, leaning against the doorframe. "This house has been too quiet since." He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "It's nice to hear singing again." Curiosity piqued, Zarah couldn't help but ask, "Since what, Mr. Ashwood?" Keegan's expression grew distant. "Since my wife died." The revelation stunned Zarah into silence. In all their conversations, Keegan had never mentioned being married. She searched for the right words, aware that she was treading on deeply personal ground. "I didn't know you were widowed," she finally said. "I'm very sorry." "It was 5 years ago," Keegan replied, his voice steady but tinged with old grief. "Caroline caught pneumonia the winter after we settled here. She'd always been delicate. The prairie winters were harder on her than either of us expected. "You must have loved her very much," Zarah said softly. Keegan nodded, his gaze focused somewhere beyond the kitchen walls. "She was a city girl from St. Louis. Her parents thought she was crazy to marry a man determined to build a ranch in Kansas, but she believed in me, in what we could create together." He sighed. "She loved to sing while she worked. That's why your humming caught my attention." Zarah felt a sudden understanding of the empty rooms upstairs, the occasional sadness she glimpsed in Keegan's eyes. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Mr. Ashwood." He seemed to return to himself then, offering a small smile. "I don't talk about her often. Not because I want to forget, but because people get uncomfortable. They either offer platitudes or change the subject entirely." "Loss changes us," Zarah said, returning to her cooking. "But I don't believe we honor those we've lost by pretending they never existed." Keegan studied her with renewed interest. "You're a wise woman, Zarah Vance." It was the first time he had used her first name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. Before either could acknowledge it, Jacob burst through the door with news of another cow in distress, and Keegan was gone, leaving Zarah with a pot of stew and complicated thoughts about the man who employed her. As spring progressed into summer, subtle changes occurred in the relationship between Keegan and Zarah. They still maintained the formality of employer and employee, but their conversations grew longer and more personal. Often, after Jacob and Finn had retired to the bunkhouse, Keegan would linger in the kitchen, helping with the last of the evening chores while sharing stories of his day or asking about hers. Zarah found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, when the pretense of their roles seemed to soften around the edges. She learned that Keegan had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, that he loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it, and that he dreamed of making Ashwood Ranch one of the most respected in Kansas. In turn, she shared carefully selected pieces of her own, past her love of music, her mother's talent for storytelling, her father's pride in their small Missouri farm before debt and drought had worn him down. What she did not share was the reason she had left Missouri so abruptly, carrying everything she owned in a single sack. The question came on a warm June evening as thunderclouds gathered on the distant horizon, promising a summer storm. Keegan had brought in fresh milk from the evening milking, and they stood side by side at the kitchen counter, straining it into crocks. "You know," he said casually, "in the 3 months you've been here, you've never really explained what brought you to Concordia." "Just that your father died and the farm was lost." Zarah's hands stilled momentarily. "It's not a particularly interesting story. I'd still like to hear it, if you're willing to share." Zarah considered deflecting again, but something in Keegan's honest interest made her reconsider. Perhaps it was time to unburden herself, at least partially. "After my father died," she began, focusing on the task before her, "our neighbor, Mr. Blackwell, offered to buy our farm. His property adjoined ours, and he'd always wanted to expand." She took a steadying breath. "What I didn't know was that my father had already mortgaged the farm to its limit. There was almost nothing left after the bank took its share." "That must have been difficult," Keegan said softly. "It was," Zarah agreed, "but Mr. Blackwell had another proposal." He was a widower, 53 years old, with grown children. "He offered marriage along with the promise to clear my father's remaining debts." Understanding dawned in Keegan's eyes. "And you didn't want to marry him?" "No, he was not a kind man. His first wife had been a childhood friend of my mother's, and she had confided in my mother about his temper." Zarah's voice grew quieter, "But the entire town seemed to think I should be grateful for his offer. That at 22, with no family and no prospects, I should count myself lucky that anyone would want me, especially someone of Mr. Blackwell's standing." "So you left," Keegan concluded. "I sold what little was truly mine, packed what I could carry, and left in the night," Zarah confirmed. "I had heard that Concordia was growing, that there might be opportunities for a woman willing to work hard." "Brave," Keegan murmured, his eyes on her face. Zarah shook her head. "Desperate, and lucky that you happened to be riding into town when I arrived." "Not luck," Keegan said firmly. "Providence?" The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Zarah looked up to find Keegan watching her, his expression a complex mixture of admiration and something deeper that made her heart race. The moment was broken by the first rumble of thunder, startlingly close. Keegan stepped back, clearing his throat. "Storm's nearly here. I should check that everything's secure in the barn before it hits." "Of course," Zarah nodded, grateful for the interruption that allowed her to compose herself. "Be careful." As Keegan hurried out to the barn, Zarah pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. The way he had looked at her, the compassion in his voice when she shared her story, it stirred feelings she had not expected to develop. Feelings that complicated their arrangement and threatened the security she had found at Ashwood Ranch. That night, as rain lashed against her window and lightning illuminated her small room in brief, brilliant flashes, Zarah made a decision. She would guard her heart more carefully. Keegan Ashwood was her employer, a kind, honorable man who had offered her refuge when she needed it most. To misinterpret his natural kindness as something more would be a disservice to them both. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, Zarah's last conscious thought was of Keegan's face, softened by lamplight as he called her brave. July brought scorching heat to the Kansas prairie, turning the lush green landscape to shades of gold and brown. The work on the ranch intensified as preparations began for the fall cattle drive. Additional hands were hired temporarily, rough men who took their meals at a table set up outside the bunkhouse rather than in the main house. Zarah found her workload doubled with the extra mouths to feed, rising before dawn to bake bread and prepare vast quantities of food that Jacob or Finn would carry to the workers. Keegan insisted she not deliver meals herself, a protective measure that both annoyed and secretly pleased her. "The drive hands are decent enough men," he explained when she protested, "but they've been on the trail for months and a woman like you might be too much temptation." "A woman like me," Zarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. Keegan's ears reddened slightly. "Beautiful, refined. The kind men dream about during lonely nights on the trail." The compliment, so casually delivered, left Zarah momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Keegan had moved on to discussing the supplies they would need from town, leaving her to wonder if he had even realized what he said. Despite her resolution to maintain professional distance, Zarah found it increasingly difficult to ignore her growing feelings for Keegan. She noticed things she had previously overlooked: the way sunlight caught the golden highlights in his brown hair, how his face creased with genuine joy when he laughed, the gentle way he handled newborn calves and skittish colts. More than once, she caught herself daydreaming about what it might be like to be more than his housekeeper, to be his wife. Such thoughts were dangerous, Zarah knew. She had built a secure position for herself at Ashwood Ranch, earned the respect of the men who worked there, and saved nearly every dollar of her wages. To risk it all for romantic notions would be foolish, yet she couldn't help but wonder if Keegan might share her feelings. There were moments, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted slightly too long when passing a dish at supper, the way he sometimes sought her company even when there was no practical reason for it that suggested he might. The situation came to a head during the town's Independence Day celebration. Concordia had organized a grand affair with a parade, picnic, dance, and fireworks. The entire community turned out in their finest clothes, and Ashwood Ranch was no exception. Work was suspended for the day, and even the temporary hands were given leave to attend the festivities. Zarah wore her best dress, the blue one she had arrived in, now carefully mended and adorned with new lace collar and cuffs purchased with her wages. She had arranged her hair more elaborately than usual, securing it with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. When she emerged from her room, Keegan was waiting in the kitchen, dressed in a crisp white shirt, black vest, and his best trousers. He stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful, Miss Vance." "Thank you, Mr. Ashwood," she replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "You look quite handsome yourself." The ride into town was filled with anticipation. Jacob and Finn had gone ahead earlier, eager for a day of freedom, leaving Keegan and Zarah to follow in the wagon. Their conversation flowed easily, both relaxed by the holiday atmosphere. Concordia was transformed for the celebration. Bunting in red, white, and blue decorated the buildings, and American flags flew from every possible perch. The town square had been cleared for dancing, with wooden platforms constructed and a small band setting up their instruments. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family in the county. Throughout the day, Zarah was aware of Keegan's attentive presence. He introduced her to townspeople she hadn't yet met, made sure she always had refreshments, and stood proudly beside her as many complimented the improvements at Ashwood Ranch since her arrival. "You've made quite an impression on Keegan," observed Mrs. Holloway, who had sought Zarah out during the picnic. "I've never seen him so animated." "He's a kind employer," Zarah replied carefully. Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by the neutral response. "He's more than that, I think, or wants to be." Before Zarah could formulate a reply, the band struck up a lively tune and couples began gathering for the dance. To her surprise, Keegan appeared at her side, hand extended. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Vance?" Dancing with Keegan proved to be both wonderful and torturous. He was a skilled dancer, leading her confidently through the steps while maintaining a proper distance. Yet even that distance seemed charged with unspoken feelings, each brief touch of their hands sending warmth cascading through her. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the music slowed, and couples drew closer together for the more intimate waltzes. Keegan's hand at her waist felt both protective and possessive, and Zarah found herself unable to look directly at him, afraid her eyes would reveal too much. "You're very quiet," he murmured as they turned gracefully around the square. "Just enjoying the music," she replied, finally gathering the courage to meet his gaze. What she saw there made her breath catch a tenderness and longing that surely mirrored her own feelings. For a heartbeat, the noise and movement around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, connected by more than just the dance. "Zarah," Keegan began, his voice low and intimate. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you, Keegan Ashwood," a female voice interrupted. "I thought that was you." They stopped dancing as a striking woman in an expensive green dress approached, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of city fashion rather than prairie practicality. "Deanna," Keegan said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't know you were in town." "Just arrived yesterday," the woman replied, her smile dazzling as she placed a familiar hand on Keegan's arm. "Father has business with the railroad, and I simply had to come along when I heard there would be a celebration." Her gaze shifted to Zarah, assessing and dismissive in equal measure. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" "Of course," Keegan said, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Deanna Weston, this is Miss Zarah Vance. Miss Vance is the housekeeper at my ranch." The words stung more than they should have, even though they were factually correct. Somehow, after the closeness they had shared during the dance, to be identified merely as his housekeeper felt like a demotion. "How nice," Deanna said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I've heard you've made quite a success of your ranch, Keegan. Father will be pleased." "Thank you," Keegan replied stiffly. "How long will you be staying in Concordia?" "At least a week." Deanna smiled, her hand still resting on his arm. "You must come to dinner at the hotel." "Father would love to see you." "That would be pleasant," Keegan said, though his expression suggested otherwise. An awkward silence fell, broken when Zarah stepped back slightly. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the pie I contributed to the dessert table." Before either could respond, she turned and walked away, her composure maintained through sheer force of will. Once out of sight, Zarah found a quiet spot behind the general store, needing a moment to collect herself. The appearance of Deanna Weston had been like a bucket of cold water, reminding Zarah of the reality she had allowed herself to forget. Keegan was a successful rancher, a respected member of the community. He moved in social circles that included women like Deanna Weston, beautiful, wealthy, and clearly of good family. Whatever moments of connection Zarah thought they had shared, they couldn't bridge the gulf between their positions. She was his housekeeper, nothing more. By the time fireworks illuminated the night sky, Zarah had composed herself enough to rejoin the celebration. She kept a polite distance from Keegan for the remainder of the evening, engaging in conversations with other townspeople and helping serve the communal desserts. If Keegan noticed her withdrawal, he gave no sign of it. He was frequently in conversation with Deanna Weston and her father, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and an authoritative manner. Occasionally, Zarah would feel Keegan's gaze on her, but whenever she looked in his direction, he was focused elsewhere. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired from the long day and lost in their own thoughts. Jacob and Finn had stayed in town, planning to return the next morning, leaving Keegan and Zarah alone in the wagon under a star-filled sky. "You seem to enjoy yourself today," Keegan finally said as they neared the ranch. "It was a lovely celebration," Zarah replied neutrally. "Concordia knows how to mark an occasion. Deanna Weston is an old acquaintance," Keegan offered, as if sensing the source of her tension. "Her father was an investor in the railroad. They live in Kansas City now. She seems very refined," Zarah said carefully. Keegan glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "She is. Her father has been suggesting a match between us for years." The casual statement hit Zarah like a physical blow. "I see. That would be quite advantageous for the ranch, I imagine." "It would," Keegan agreed, his tone oddly flat. "Mr. Weston has connections that could help expand our cattle business considerably." They lapsed into silence again, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady hoofbeats of the horses. Zarah fought against the tightness in her throat, reminding herself that she had no claim on Keegan, no right to feel betrayed by his practical consideration of a beneficial marriage. When they reached the ranch, Keegan helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm at her waist. For just a moment he held her there, looking down at her face illuminated by the moon. "Zarah, about what I was going to say earlier before Deanna interrupted, it's late, Mr. Ashwood," Zarah interrupted, stepping away from his touch, "and we have an early start tomorrow. Good night." She hurried to her room without waiting for his response, closing the door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow the tears to come, silent and hot against her cheeks as she leaned against the door. Zarah had been a fool to imagine that someone like Keegan Ashwood would see her as anything more than a convenient employee. She had mistaken kindness for affection, respect for something deeper. The sooner she accepted that, the better it would be for everyone. Yet as she prepared for bed, removing her mother's combs and carefully hanging up her blue dress, Zarah couldn't help but wonder what Keegan had been about to tell her before Deanna Weston's arrival. Whatever it was, she decided, it was better left unsaid. Some doors, once opened, could never be properly closed again. The week following the Independence Day celebration brought changes to the usual routine at Ashwood Ranch. Keegan was frequently absent, riding into town on business that he explained only vaguely. When he was present, he seemed distracted, his usual easy conversation replaced by brief, polite exchanges. Zarah maintained a professional demeanor, focusing on her duties and interacting with Keegan only as necessary. If Jacob and Finn noticed the sudden coolness between them, they were wise enough not to comment. On Thursday evening, as Zarah was preparing supper, Keegan entered the kitchen dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed. "I won't be joining you for supper," he announced. "I've been invited to dine with the Westons at the hotel." "Of course," Zarah nodded, keeping her eyes on the potatoes she was peeling. "Shall I keep a plate warm for later?" "No need. It might be late when I return." He hesitated, then added, "Mr. Weston has a business proposition I need to consider carefully." Something in his tone made Zarah look up. Keegan was watching her intently, as if waiting for a particular reaction. When she offered none, he sighed almost imperceptibly. "Good night, Miss Vance." The return to formal address stung, but Zarah merely inclined her head. "Good night, Mr. Ashwood. Enjoy your evening." After he left, Zarah moved through the motions of finishing supper and serving Jacob and Finn with mechanical efficiency. Her mind was filled with unwelcome images of Keegan dining with the elegant Deanna, discussing their future together over fine wine and expensive food. "You feeling all right, Miss Vance?" Jacob asked as she cleared the plates, his weathered face concerned. "You seem a bit peaked." "Just tired," Zarah assured him with a forced smile. "The heat makes sleeping difficult." "Ain't that the truth?" Finn agreed. "Been like an oven in the bunkhouse. Jacob here snores loud enough to wake the dead, which don't help neither." Their gentle bickering continued as they left for the bunkhouse, leaving Zarah alone in the quiet house. She finished the dishes slowly, reluctant to retreat to her room where thoughts and feelings she'd been suppressing all day would have free rein. A soft knock at the kitchen door startled her. It was too early for Keegan to have returned, and Jacob and Finn would have come through the main entrance. Cautiously, Zarah approached the door, relieved to find Mrs. Holloway on the other side. "Evening, Zarah," the older woman greeted. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Zarah replied, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. "Please come in. Can I offer you some coffee, or there's fresh lemonade?" "Lemonade would be lovely," Mrs. Holloway said, settling herself at the kitchen table. "I was in the area delivering some herbal remedies to the Peterson farm and thought I'd stop by on my way back to town." As Zarah poured the lemonade, Mrs. Holloway studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're looking a bit down, dear. Anything you'd like to talk about?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly broke Zarah's carefully maintained composure. She busied herself with arranging cookies on a plate, buying time to steady her voice. "It's nothing, really, just the usual summer fatigue." Mrs. Holloway hummed skeptically. "Would this nothing happen to be dining with the Westons in town tonight?" Zarah's head snapped up in surprise. "How did you know?" "Small town," Mrs. Holloway shrugged. "Deanna Weston has been telling everyone who'll listen that her father is finalizing a business arrangement with Keegan. She's implied rather strongly that a marriage proposal will be part of the deal." The confirmation of her worst fears made Zarah's knees weak. She sank into a chair opposite Mrs. Holloway, no longer bothering to hide her distress. "It makes perfect sense," she said quietly. "The Westons can provide capital and connections. It's a sound business decision." "Business, perhaps," Mrs. Holloway agreed, sipping her lemonade, "but Keegan Ashwood has never struck me as a man who makes life decisions based solely on business. What other consideration would there be?" Zarah asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than desperate for reassurance. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "Love, my dear, or at least the potential for it." "Deanna Weston is beautiful, educated, and wealthy," Zarah pointed out. "Any man would be fortunate to have her regard." "True enough," the older woman nodded. "But in the 3 years I've known Keegan, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The statement hung in the air between them, both tantalizing and terrifying. Zarah wanted to believe it, yet fear of disappointment held her back. "Even if that were true," she finally said, "I'm his housekeeper, he's my employer. Any feelings would be inappropriate and complicated." "Life is complicated, Zarah," Mrs. Holloway said gently. "The question is whether the complications are worth navigating for what lies beyond them." Before Zarah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A moment later, Keegan's voice could be heard outside, speaking to his horse as he dismounted. "That's my cue to depart," Mrs. Holloway said, rising quickly. "Think about what I said, dear. And remember, nothing ventured, nothing gained." She slipped out the back door just as Keegan entered through the front, their paths not crossing. Zarah stood frozen in the kitchen, caught completely off guard by his early return. Keegan stopped short when he saw her, equally surprised. "Miss Vance. I thought you'd have retired by now." "Mrs. Holloway stopped by," Zarah explained, gesturing vaguely toward the evidence of their visit: 2 glasses and the plate of cookies. "You're back earlier than expected." "Yes," Keegan replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "The evening did not go as the Westons had planned." "I'm sorry to hear that," Zarah said automatically, though her heart leapt with hope. Keegan studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. "No, you're not, and neither am I." The directness of his statement surprised her into silence. Keegan moved further into the kitchen, loosening his tie as he did so. Mr. Weston offered a substantial investment in the ranch, he continued, contingent upon my marriage to Deanna. He was quite disappointed when I declined. You declined, Zarah repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I did. Keegan took a step closer to her. Because while it would have been advantageous from a business perspective, it would have been disastrous personally. Why? The question escaped before Zarah could stop it, small and uncertain. Keegan's expression softened, and he closed the remaining distance between them until they were standing just inches apart. Because Deanna Weston is not the woman I want to spend my life with, he said quietly. She's not the woman I think about when I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night. She's not the woman who has turned this house back into a home, who has reminded me what it means to care deeply for someone again. Zarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Keegan must hear it. Mr. Ashwood, Keegan, he corrected gently. Please. Keegan, she amended, the name feeling both foreign and right on her lips. I'm your housekeeper. Is that all you want to be? He asked, his eyes searching hers. The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Zarah thought of all the reasons to say yes: practicality, security, the comfort of clear boundaries. Then she thought of Mrs. Holloway's words, nothing ventured, nothing gained. No, she admitted, the single word carrying the weight of months of unacknowledged feelings. That's not all I want to be. Relief and joy transformed Keegan's face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised a hand to cup her cheek. I've been falling in love with you since the day you arrived in Concordia, carrying your whole life in one sack and still walking with your head high. The confession stole Zarah's breath. I thought, after the celebration when Deanna arrived, I was confused and frustrated, Keegan admitted. I'd been working up the courage to tell you how I felt, and then Deanna appeared, reminding me of all the practical reasons to consider her father's proposal. But tonight, sitting across from her at dinner, all I could think about was you, your smile, your strength, the way you've brought life back to the ranch, back to me. Tears welled in Zarah's eyes, tears of relief and happiness after days of uncertainty. I've been trying so hard not to love you, she confessed. I was afraid of complicating everything, of losing the security I've found here. You will never lose that, Keegan promised fervently, whether you want to be my housekeeper, my friend, or something more. You will always have a place here. And if I want to be something more, Zarah asked softly. In answer, Keegan leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when she responded eagerly. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer while hers slid up to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Keegan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Zarah Vance. Not because you keep my house in order or cook the best meals in Kansas, but because you're the bravest, most genuine person I've ever known. I love you too, Zarah replied, the words feeling like a homecoming, though I do make excellent biscuits. Keegan laughed, the sound rich and joyful in the quiet kitchen. That you do, it's just one of your many fine qualities. They stood together in the warm kitchen, talking and laughing and occasionally stealing kisses until the lateness of the hour could no longer be ignored. Before they parted for the night, Keegan took both her hands in his. I don't want to rush you, he said seriously. We have time to figure out what comes next, but I want you to know that my intention is marriage when you're ready. I'd like that, Zarah replied honestly. But you're right, there's no hurry. For now, I'm just happy knowing we're walking the same path. As Zarah prepared for bed that night, she looked around her small room with new eyes. What had once seemed like a sanctuary from uncertainty now felt like a temporary stop on a journey to something greater. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she allowed herself to envision a future filled with possibilities rather than limitations. With Keegan's love, her life was no longer something to be carried alone in a single sack, but something to be built together, with both their hands joined in the effort. The news of Keegan and Zarah's courtship spread through Concordia with predictable speed. By the time Zarah accompanied Keegan to Sunday services the following weekend, the entire congregation had already formed opinions on the matter. Most were supportive, viewing the match as natural given Zarah's demonstrated capability and Keegan's need for a wife to help manage his growing ranch. A few, particularly those who had hoped to see their own daughters catch the successful rancher's eye, were less enthusiastic. Deanna Weston and her father had departed Concordia immediately after Keegan's rejection of their proposal, but not before Deanna had made several cutting remarks about men who chose to marry their servants. The comments reached Zarah through Mrs. Holloway, who reported them with indignation on Zarah's behalf. "Pay her no mind," Mrs. Holloway advised during one of her now frequent visits to the ranch. "She's just bitter because she couldn't buy herself a husband with her father's money." "I'm not concerned about Deanna Weston," Zarah replied truthfully. The security of Keegan's love had given her a confidence that made such petty attacks easier to dismiss. The practical aspects of their changing relationship required careful navigation. Zarah continued her duties as housekeeper while they courted, though Keegan insisted on paying her wages even after she protested that it seemed unnecessary given their understanding. "Until we're married, you deserve compensation for your work," he insisted. "Besides, I like knowing you have your own money. Independence suits you." Their courtship unfolded through shared moments amidst the busy life of the ranch. Evening walks along the creek that bordered the property, Sunday afternoons, reading together on the porch. Occasional trips into town for supplies that turned into opportunities for private conversations away from the knowing grins of Jacob and Finn. Physical affection between them developed gradually, both mindful of propriety despite their mutual feelings. Kisses stolen in the kitchen, embraces under the stars, hands clasped as they walked the boundaries of what would one day be their shared land, each touch was a promise of the future they were building together. As summer turned to autumn, the ranch's pace accelerated with preparation for the fall cattle drive. Keegan would be gone for several weeks, taking the year's calves to market in Kansas City. It would be their first separation since declaring their feelings, and both approached it with a mixture of practical acceptance and personal reluctance. The night before his departure, after Jacob and Finn had retired to the bunkhouse, Keegan and Zarah sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "I have something for you," Keegan said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until I returned, but—" He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in Zarah's palm. Inside, she found a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Keegan explained softly. "She would have loved you." Zarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Keegan's face. "Are you asking?" "I am," he confirmed, taking her hand. "Zarah Vance, will you marry me, not as my housekeeper or helpmate, but as my wife, my equal, my partner in all things?" "Yes," Zarah whispered, her heart too full for more elaborate words. "Yes, I will marry you." Keegan slipped the ring onto her finger, then sealed the promise with a kiss that spoke of devotion and longing. When they parted, both were smiling through tears of joy. "When I return," Keegan said, "we'll make plans. Whatever kind of wedding you want, big or small, elaborate or simple, it's your choice." "Something small," Zarah decided immediately. "Here at the ranch with just our friends. This is our home. It seems right to begin our marriage here." Keegan's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." He touched the ring on her finger. "This makes it official, but I've considered you my family since the day you decided to stay." The cattle drive departed at dawn the next morning. Zarah rose early to prepare a hearty breakfast for the men, then stood on the porch watching as the herd moved slowly eastward, driven by Keegan, Jacob, Finn, and the temporary hands hired for the journey. Keegan turned in his saddle for one last look at the ranch at her before the distance swallowed him from view. The weeks of Keegan's absence were both challenging and affirming for Zarah. She managed the ranch with quiet confidence, handling the daily tasks and minor crises that arose with the competence she had developed over months of careful observation. The two older ranch hands who had stayed behind to tend the remaining stock treated her with respect, accepting her authority as Keegan's fiancée without question. In the evenings, alone in the house that had become her home, Zarah began to plan their future together. She moved her few possessions from the small attached room to the main house, claiming the space not as a housekeeper, but as the woman who would soon be its mistress. She spent hours in what had been Keegan's bedroom, soon to be their bedroom, making it a place where both would feel comfortable, adding feminine touches while respecting the masculine elements already present. She wrote long letters to Keegan, entrusting them to the weekly mail carrier with instructions to deliver them to the hotel in Kansas City, where she knew he would stay after the cattle sale. In these letters, she poured out her thoughts about their future, her hopes for their life together, and occasionally her fears. "Sometimes I worry," she wrote in one such letter, "that I'm not what people expect for the wife of a successful rancher like you. I have no dowry, no influential family, no formal education beyond what my parents provided. What I offer is only myself, my heart, my hands, my determination to build a good life with you." Keegan's reply arrived a week later, carried by a special messenger who had passed the cattle drive on its return journey. "What you offer," he had written, his strong handwriting filling the page, "is everything I have ever wanted or needed. Your heart, which sees the world with compassion and courage. Your hands, which create beauty and comfort from the simplest materials. Your determination, which carried you across half a state with your life in a sack, never surrendering to fear or despair. You are exactly what I want, Zarah Vance, and soon to be Keegan Ashwood. The opinions of others matter far less to me than the certainty I feel when I think of our future together. I am counting the days until I return to you to our home." The letter, read and reread until Zarah had practically memorized it, became a talisman during the final days of waiting. She carried it in her pocket as she supervised the last of the harvest, as she prepared the house for winter, as she planned the simple ceremony that would unite their lives officially. The cattle drive returned on a crisp October day, the men tired but triumphant after a successful sale. Zarah stood on the porch, watching as the riders approached, her eyes finding Keegan immediately among them. He urged his horse ahead of the others, closing the distance between them at a gallop that spoke of his eagerness. Before his mount had fully stopped, Keegan was dismounting, taking the porch steps 2 at a time to reach her. His arms encircled her waist, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that erased the weeks of separation in an instant. "Welcome home," Zarah said when he finally set her down, her hands framing his face, relearning the beloved features that had occupied her dreams. "It's good to be home," Keegan replied, his voice rough with emotion. His gaze moved past her to the house, noting the changes she had made in his absence, the new curtains visible through the windows, the arrangement of chrysanthemums on the porch railing, the welcome wreath on the front door. "You've been busy, making it ours," Zarah explained simply. His smile was all the approval she needed. "It looks perfect. You're perfect." Behind them, Jacob cleared his throat dramatically. "Hate to interrupt the reunion, boss, but these horses need tending." Keegan laughed, keeping one arm around Zarah's waist as he turned to face his returning crew. "Stable them, then get yourselves cleaned up. We're celebrating tonight both a successful drive and my upcoming wedding." The men cheered, their weariness temporarily forgotten in the excitement of celebration. As they led the horses toward the barn, Keegan turned back to Zarah, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about our wedding," he said, leading her to the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for private conversations. "I'd like to suggest something, but I want you to feel free to disagree." "What is it?" Zarah asked, curious about his suddenly solemn tone. "I was thinking we might marry sooner rather than later, perhaps next week before winter sets in fully." He took her hands, his thumbs tracing patterns on her skin. "The cattle sale was more successful than I'd hoped. We can take a brief honeymoon trip perhaps to Denver or even San Francisco before returning for the winter months. Next week." Zarah repeated, surprised but not displeased by the suggestion. "That doesn't leave much time for preparation. I know, Keegan acknowledged. And if you want more time, we'll wait. But I've spent the past month sleeping under the stars, thinking about you, about us, about the life we're building. I don't want to waste any more time. The earnestness in his expression melted any hesitation Zarah might have felt. Next week sounds perfect, she agreed, leaning forward to seal the decision with a kiss. I don't want to waste any more time either. They were married on a Sunday afternoon in late October, with the prairie autumn painting the landscape in golds and russets around them. The ceremony took place in front of the farmhouse, with Reverend Porter from the Concordia church officiating. Mrs. Holloway stood as witness for Zarah, while Jacob performed the same role for Keegan. Finn, the other ranch hands, and a small gathering of friends from town completed the assembly. Zarah wore a new dress of deep blue silk, ordered specially from Kansas City with some of the money she had saved from her wages. Her mother's combs secured her hair, and around her neck hung a gold locket, a wedding gift from Keegan, containing miniature portraits of both her parents that he had commissioned from a traveling artist based on descriptions Zarah had provided. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly against the backdrop of the land they would tend together. When Reverend Porter pronounced them husband and wife, Keegan's kiss was both tender and promising, marking the end of their separate journeys and the beginning of a shared path. The celebration that followed was joyous and unpretentious, exactly what both had wanted. Tables set up in the yard groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors and friends. Finn, who possessed unexpected musical talent, played fiddle while others danced on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Children darted between the adults, adding their laughter to the general merriment. As evening approached, Keegan found Zarah sitting slightly apart from the festivities, watching their guests with a contented smile. He settled beside her, taking her hand now adorned with both engagement and wedding rings in his. "Happy, Mrs. Ashwood?" he asked, the new title making both of them smile. "Very," Zarah confirmed, leaning against his shoulder, though it still seemed somewhat unreal. 8 months ago I arrived in Concordia with nothing but that sack and desperate hope. Now I have everything. We have everything, Keegan corrected gently, his arm encircling her waist. And it began because I happened to be riding into town at exactly the right moment to offer you a hand with your burden. Both hands, Zarah reminded him, thinking of that first meeting. You offered both hands to hold it. Keegan's expression softened with the memory. The best decision I ever made. As the celebration wound down and guests departed with final congratulations, Keegan and Zarah stood together on the porch of their home, watching the last wagon disappear down the lane. Tomorrow they would depart for their honeymoon journey, but tonight belonged to them alone, their first night as husband and wife in the house they would fill with love and, God willing, children. "Come inside, wife," Keegan said softly, his hand extended to her in an echo of that first offer of assistance months before. "Let me help you carry whatever burdens tomorrow may bring." Zarah placed her hand in his, her heart full of certainty. "And I'll help carry yours, that's what partners do." Together, they stepped across the threshold into their shared future, no longer employer and employee, no longer merely courting couple, but husband and wife, equal partners in all that lay ahead. Epilogue. Spring 1886, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the Ashwood farmhouse, now expanded to accommodate the growing family within its walls. Zarah smiled as she kneaded bread dough, glancing outside to where Keegan was teaching their 5-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, watched from the safety of Jacob's arms, clapping enthusiastically at her brother's progress. 10 years had passed since that fateful day when Keegan had found Zarah on the road to Concordia. In that decade, Ashwood Ranch had flourished, growing from 200 acres to over 1,000, with a reputation for quality cattle that drew buyers from as far as Chicago. The original farmhouse had been expanded twice, first to add a proper dining room and study, then to create additional bedrooms for their children. Zarah wiped flour from her hands and moved to the door, leaning against the frame to better observe her family. At 32, she had grown into a confident woman, secure in her role as wife, mother, and partner in the ranch's operations. The insecure young woman who had carried her life in a single sack was still part of her, but now that history informed her compassion for others rather than her fear of the future. Keegan, nearing 40 but still vigorous and handsome, caught sight of her watching and waved, his smile as warm as it had been the day they wed. The years had added a few strands of silver to his hair and deepened the laugh lines around his eyes, but they had only strengthened the bond between them, each challenge faced and overcome together. "Mama, look," Thomas called, successfully guiding his pony in a small circle. "I'm riding by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Zarah called back, pride swelling in her chest. "You're doing wonderfully." "Me next, Papa," Elizabeth demanded, squirming to be put down. "Me ride too." "When you're a bit older, Princess," Keegan promised, helping Thomas dismount before swinging Elizabeth up for a quick ride in his arms, making horse sounds that sent her into fits of giggles. The scene before Zarah was so perfect, so precisely what she had dreamed of during those dark days after her father's death, that tears pricked her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for the life she and Keegan had built together. Their journey had not been without challenges. The harsh winter of 1881 had nearly devastated their herd. The drought of 1883 had threatened their crops. Elizabeth's difficult birth had left Zarah bedridden for weeks, frightening Keegan more than he would ever admit. Yet through each trial they had emerged stronger, their commitment to each other and their shared dreams unwavering. As she watched Keegan with their children, Zarah's hand moved unconsciously to the small swell of her abdomen, where their third child had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Keegan yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. Tonight, she decided, after the children were asleep, she would tell him about the new life that would join their family in the winter. The day continued with the pleasant rhythm of ranch life in springtime. Jacob, now promoted to foreman, supervised the younger hands as they moved cattle to fresh pasture. Finn, who had married the schoolteacher 2 years prior and built a small house on land Keegan had gifted them, stopped by with his infant son for a visit. Mrs. Holloway, now in her 70s but still spry, arrived with a basket of preserves and stayed for dinner, entertaining the children with stories of Concordia's early days. After the children were bathed and put to bed, their prayers said and lullabies sung, Zarah found Keegan on the front porch, gazing at the spring stars that illuminated the prairie night. He extended his hand as she approached, drawing her down beside him on the swing that had witnessed so many of their important conversations. "Thomas is getting so big," Keegan observed, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. "He'll be ready to help with the real ranch work soon." "Not too soon, I hope," Zarah replied, leaning into his embrace. "Let him be a child a while longer." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creaking of the swing and the night insects' chorus. Finally, Zarah took a deep breath, ready to share her news. "I visited Dr. Matthews yesterday," she began, feeling Keegan immediately tense beside her. "Are you ill?" he asked, concern sharp in his voice as he turned to study her face in the dim light from the window. "No," Zarah assured him, placing her hand over his. "Quite the opposite, in fact. We're going to have another baby, Keegan. Around Christmas, Dr. Matthews thinks." Joy transformed Keegan's expression, erasing the worry lines that had appeared at her first words. "Another baby," he repeated, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "Are you happy about it?" "Very," Zarah confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "I had begun to think our family was complete with Thomas and Elizabeth. This feels like an unexpected blessing." "The best kind," Keegan agreed, pulling her closer for a tender kiss. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, an intimate gesture that had become their private signal of deep emotion. "I love you, Zarah Ashwood, more today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," Zarah replied, the words as heartfelt now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them. for helping me carry my burdens, and for giving me so much more to carry that's wonderful rather than painful." Later, as they prepared for bed in the large master bedroom that had long since become their shared sanctuary, Zarah paused before the dresser where her most treasured possessions were displayed. Her mother's hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, the small Bible that had traveled with her from Missouri, tangible links to her past that had once represented everything she owned in the world. Beside them now stood newer treasures. A portrait of their family painted the previous year, Thomas's first carved wooden horse, a pressed flower from Elizabeth's christening bouquet. Physical representations of the life she and Keegan had created together, a life richer and more fulfilling than the frightened young woman with a sack over her shoulder could have imagined. As she slipped into bed beside her husband, Zarah thought about the journey that had brought them here from that dusty road into Concordia to this moment of quiet contentment. So much had changed, yet the essence of what had drawn them together remained constant: mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had only deepened with time and challenges overcome. "What are you thinking about?" Keegan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as he extinguished the lamp. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," Zarah replied, settling into his embrace. "If my father hadn't died, if I hadn't been forced to leave Missouri, if you hadn't happened to be riding into town exactly when I arrived." "Providence," Keegan murmured, echoing the word he had used years before. "Some things are meant to be, Zarah. I believe that with all my heart." In the darkness, with Keegan's steady heartbeat beneath her ear and their unborn child nestled safely within her, Zarah Ashwood gave silent thanks for the twists of fate that had led her to this life. From carrying everything she owned in a single sack to helping build a ranch and family that stretched across the prairie, it had been a journey of faith, courage, and love. And it had begun with a simple offer. Both hands extended to help carry a burden, not out of obligation, but out of the simple human kindness that would grow into a love strong enough to last a lifetime.